Hello, welcome back. I'm JIAT De Silva, an undergraduate of the JAMA Institute for Advanced Technology. Welcome back with the project named eShop, and today we're going to discuss about the program of this product registration page, including the image uploading. So then let's move to the code of this. Here I have used a PHP script and I have included our header.php file, and then after that I have used a if condition here and I have checked whether a session by the name u is set. If a session by the name u is not set, we directing to the else of this if condition. In the else of this if condition, I have called a header function, and inside that I have given the location as home.php. It means if there's no any session by the name u is set, then we redirecting back to the home.php file. So if this session by the name u is set, then we include our connection.php file, which includes the connection code with our database, and after that in the select tag, which related to the select product category label, where I have given an id as category, and then by skipping the option tag which have the text as select category with the value as 0, I'm using a PHP script here, and inside that I have called a search function with the query select all from category table, and then store in the value we get back through this search query in a variable called category result set, and then we are getting the number of rows in this category result set, and then storing that in a variable called category num. And then after that we are using a for loop here, and inside the for loop I'm making a variable called x and assigning the value as 0 to it, and then I'm checking whether the value of x is less than the value that's stored in the category num, and then I'm using an increment here. I'm getting row by row that's stored in the variable called category result set through the fetch assoc, and storing the relevant row in the variable called category data by closing the PHP script and opening the PHP script. In between those two, I'm using the option tag, and I'm giving the value of this option tag as, again opening the PHP script and echo the value that's stored by the name category ID that's stored in the variable called category data. As the text to be displayed in this option tag, I am again using the PHP script and echo the value that's stored by the name category name in the variable called category data. And I'm using for loop here as I want to get all the categories that's stored in our database. And in the select tag which related to the select product brand label, there too I have given an ID as brand, and similarly we have skipped the option tag with the text as select brand which have the value as 0, and we again use the PHP script and we call the search function here with the query as select all from the brand table, and storing the values we get back from our database in a variable called brand rs or the brand result set, and then we obtaining the number of rows in it and storing that in a variable called brand num. And then here too we using a for loop, and then I check whether the value of this variable I is less than the value that's stored in the brand num, and using an increment here. Inside this for loop I'm obtaining row by row that's stored in this brand result set through the fetch assoc, and storing that row in a variable called brand data. And within these two, closing and opening PHP scripts, I am using the option tag and giving the value of this option tag as, by again using the PHP script, I echo the value that's stored by the name brand ID that's stored in the variable called brand data, and displaying the value of this option tag as, again opening the PHP script and echo the value that's stored by the name brand name in the variable called brand data. So in the next select tag related to the label called select product model, there too I have given an ID as model here to the select tag, and by skipping the option tag with the value 0 and with the text select model, I'm using a PHP script here, and I'm calling a search function here with the text as, with the query as select all from the model table, and storing the values we get back in a variable called model result set, and then I am obtaining the number of rows in this model result set variable and storing that in a variable called model num, and then inside this for loop I am obtaining a variable as I and assigning a value as 0 to it, and I check whether the variable I is less than the value that's stored in the model num and using an increment here. And then inside this for loop I'm obtaining row by row that's stored in the variable called result set through the fetch assoc and storing the relevant row in a variable called model data, and through this option tag I'm displaying the information that's stored in the relevant row. As the value of this option tag, I have used the PHP script and I have echo the value that's stored by the name model ID that's stored in the variable called model data, and as the display text within this option tag I have again used the PHP script and I have echo the value that's stored by the name model name that's stored in the variable called model data. And then in the input tag related to the label called add the title to your product, I have given an ID as title, and then after that for the input related to this brand new label I have given an ID as B here, and then for the input tag which related to this label called used, there too I have given an ID as U, and here for the select tag which related to the label called select product color I have given an ID as color here. By skipping the option tag with the value 0 and with the text as select color, I have used the PHP script and I have used a search function here with the query as select all from the color table and storing the value we get back in a variable called color result set, and obtain the number of rows in this variable called color result set in a variable called color now. And then here I'm again using a for loop and check whether the value of this variable I is less than the value that's stored in the variable called color num and using an increment here. And inside this for loop I'm obtaining row by row that's stored in this variable called color result set through the fetch assoc and storing the relevant row in a variable called color data, and through this option tag I'm displaying the data that's stored in the relevant row. As the value of this option tag I am using again a PHP script and echo the value that's stored by the name color ID in the variable called color data, and as the text to be displayed I'm again using the PHP script and echo the value that's stored by the name color name in the variable called color data. And then for the input tag related to the label called add product quantity I have given an ID as quantity here, and then after that for the input tag related to the cost per item label, there too I have given an ID as cost here. Similarly for the input tag related to the label called delivery cost within Colombo I have given an ID as DWC, and similarly for the input tag related to the label called delivery cost out of Colombo I have given an ID as DOC here. And for the text area tag which related to the label called product description I have given an ID as DESC here, and then after that for the three image tag related to this add product images label I have given the IDs as I0, I1 and I2 respectively. To the input tag of this I have given an ID as image uploader, and then for the button related to these upload images I have called an on-click function as change product image. I will discuss about this change product image function later. And to the button with the text save product I have given an on-click function as add product. So then let's move to our JavaScript file to discuss about this add product function. Within this add product function I have obtained the element with the ID called category and storing that element in a variable called category. Likewise I am obtaining the element with the ID called brand and storing that in a variable called brand here, and after that obtaining the element by the ID called model and storing that in a variable called model, and obtaining the element with the ID called title and storing the relevant element in a variable called title here. And here I'm assigning a value as 0 to a variable called condition, and inside a if condition I'm obtaining the element with the id called b, and I'm checking whether if that element with the id called b is checked. If so, I'm assigning the value of this variable called condition to 1, and if not, if the element with the id called b is not checked, then it comes to the next else if condition, and in the next else if condition I have obtained the element with the id called u, and there too I have checked whether the element with the id called u is checked. If so, I'm assigning the value as 2 to this variable called condition, and after that I'm obtaining the element with the id called clr and storing the relevant element in a variable called color, and then obtaining the element with the id called quantity and storing that in a variable called quantity here, and after that obtaining the elements with the IDs cost, DWC, DOC, DESC, and storing those elements in the variables called cost, DWC, DOC, and DESC respectively. And after that I'm obtaining again the element with the ID called image uploader and storing the relevant element in a variable called image here. We create a new form data and storing that in a variable called form here, and we append the value of this variable called category with the name CA to this form, and similarly I'm storing the value that's stored in the variable called brand and with the name called b, and append that for the variable called form here. And after that I'm obtaining the value that's stored in the variable called model and with the name m, and then obtaining the value that's stored in the variable called title with the name t, and then the condition with the name con, and then the color value of the color variable with the name as col, and value of this quantity variable with the name as q, and value of this cost variable with the value with the name as co, and value of this dwc variable with the name as dwc. Similarly, the value of this doc variable with the name as doc, and value of this desc variable as with the name called de, and I'm appending all these to the to our new form data that's stored in the variable called form here. After that I'm obtaining the number of files in the variable called image and storing the relevant value in the variable called file count, and then inside a for loop check whether the value of this x is less than the file count and using an increment here. Inside this for loop I append the relevant image with the value of this x to this name called image with the relevant value here, and appending that to the new form data that we have created and that's stored in the variable called form. And after that I'm creating a new XML HTTP request and storing that in a variable called request here, and after that I'm checking the change in states of this request, assigning that to an anonymous function here. Inside that anonymous function I'm using if condition, and as the conditions I check whether the status of this request is equal to 200 and the ready state of this request is equal to 4. Inside this if condition I'm obtaining the response text of this request and storing that in a variable called response, and inside that again I'm using if condition and check whether the response we get back through the server side is equal to the success. If so, we using an alert with the text as product saved successfully, and then we are telling to reload the page again, and if the response is not equal to success then it comes to the else part of this if condition, and there then we are telling to display the response we get back through the server side here. And after that I'm using the open function here of this request variable to tell in which method this information should be transmitted to our server side. Here I'm using the post method and I'm sending the information to this add product process.php file. I'm using true here to depict I'm using the ajax method here. And after that I'm using this send function of this request, and inside the send function I'm sending this form that we have created earlier. So then let's move to the add product process.php file. At the very beginning I have started the PHP script. I have used the session start here, and after that I have included our connection.php file which include the connection code with our database, and I'm obtaining the value that's stored by the name email in the session called u and storing that relevant email in a variable called email here. And after that, I'm obtaining the values that we obtained from the JavaScript side through the post method and storing the relevant information in separate variables as a category which shows the value that comes through the name called CA through the post method. And then similarly in the brand variable, I'm storing the value that comes through the method called post with the name called B. And here after that, I have used some validation parts here. I have checked whether through these if conditions the category is empty, then we echo a message as please enter the product category. If these two conditions becomes false, then it comes to the next else if condition. It checks whether the brand field is empty or the brand is equal to 0. Then there too it displays a message as please enter the product brand. And then if these two conditions become false, and then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks the model is empty or the model is equal to 0. If so, then it displays a message as please enter the product model. If this condition 2 become false, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the title is empty. If the title is empty, then it displays a message as please enter the product title. If the title is not empty, then it comes to the next else if condition, and there it checks whether the variable called color, the color is empty or the color is equal to 0. If this condition become true, then it displays a message as please enter the product color. If these two conditions become false, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the quantity is empty. If so, there too display a message as please enter the product quantity. If the quantity is not empty, then it comes to the next else if condition, and that else if condition checks whether the cost is empty. If so, then it display message as please enter the cost per item. If not, then it comes to the next else if condition, and there it checks whether the cost is not equal to a value with contain numbers. If so, then it displays a message as the value you entered is invalid. And if the value that entered in the relevant field contain numbers, then it comes to the next else if condition, and there too it checks whether the value that's stored in this cost variable contain letters from A to Z or numbers from 0 to 9 or 0 to 9 values at first and then the A to Z values as second. If so, then it displays a message as the value you entered is invalid. If this condition 2 becomes false, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the DWC is empty. If so, then it displays a message as please enter the delivery cost within Colombo. And if this was false, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the DWC is not contain numbers. If so, then it displays a message as the value you entered is invalid. If the DWC variable includes numbers, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether this contains letters and numbers. It contains both letters and numbers. If so, then this displays a message as the value you entered is invalid. And if this DWC only contains numbers, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the DOC is empty. If so, then it displays a message as please enter the delivery cost out of Colombo. If this DOC was not empty, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether this DOC is not containing values between 0 to 9. If this condition becomes true, then it displays a message as the value you entered is invalid. If the value of this variable called DOC contains numbers, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the value that's stored in the variable called DOC contains both letters and numbers. If so, then it displays a message as the value you entered is invalid. And if this variable called DOC contain only numbers, then it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the variable called DESC is empty. If so, there too displays a message as please enter the product description. If the product description to have given by the user, then it comes to the else condition, and inside this else I have used a search function here with the query as select all from the model has brand table, where the model ID is equal to the model that we have obtained, and the brand ID is equal to the brand that we have obtained, and storing the value we obtained in a variable called model has brand resource set, and then we create a variable as model has brand ID. For that, you inside if condition I'm checking whether the number of rows in this model has brand resource set is greater than 0. If so, I'm obtaining the row by row through this fetch as hook and store in the relevant row in a variable called model has brand data. I'm assigning the value of this model has brand ID variable as the model has brand data ID. It means the value that's stored by the name ID in the variable called model has brand data. If the number of rows in this model has brand resource set is not greater than 0, then it comes to the next else if condition, and there I'm using an IUD function which includes the query as insert into model has brand table, and here I have specified the relevant columns that I need to enter the values, and I need to enter values to the column by the name model ID and the brand ID, and then I'm setting the values to the relevant columns as the value that's stored in the variable called model and the value that's stored in the variable called brand. And then as the value of this model has brand ID variable, I'm using this connection insert ID. It means I'm obtaining the ID of the row that we inserted to our database here and storing that in the variable called model has brand ID. And after that, I'm using a variable called D here, and here I'm getting a new date time function, and then again using a variable called time zone, and then I'm using a new date time zone, and there inside the brackets I'm using the Asia Colombo time zone, and then I'm using the set time zone function and setting this Asia Colombo time zone to our date time variable, and then I'm using the format function and format the date time as we needed and storing that in the variable called date here. And after that, I'm again using a variable called status and assigning a value as 1, and after that I'm here using an IUD function with the query as insert into the product table, and here I'm specify the relevant columns, and then I'm setting values to those relevant columns as the value that's stored in the variable called cost, quantity, description, title, date, DWC, DOC, category, model has brand ID, condition, status, and also the email. And after that, here too I'm obtaining the ID of the row that inserted to our database and storing that ID in a variable called product ID here. And after that, getting the size of the file that we get from the JavaScript side and storing the size of these files in the variable called length here. And inside if condition, I check whether the size of these files is less than or equal to 3 and greater than 0. We check whether this length is equal to 3 because we have given the seller at 3 product images. If so, we are using a variable as allowed image extensions and using an array here with the values as image / jpeg and image png, image svg plus xml, and using a for loop here with the variable as x and assigning a value as 0 and check whether the value of this variable x is less than the value that's stored in the variable called length and using an increment here. And inside this for loop, I'm using if condition and check whether the files with the name image and the variable called x or the value with the variable called x coming through the record files client side. If so, store in that relevant image file in a variable called image file here, and then I'm getting the type of that image file and storing that in a variable called file extension, and again using if condition here, and I'm checking whether this file extension is in the array code allowed image extensions. So we again use a variable as new image extension, and we are not assigning any value to it, and using if condition here, and again we check whether the file extension is equal to the image .jpeg. Then we assign the value of this new image extension as .jpeg. And then if the file extension was not equal to jpeg, then it comes to the next else if condition, where it checks whether the file extension is equal to png. If so, we assign the value of this new image extension as .png. If the file extension was not equal to the png, then it comes to the next else if condition, where it checks whether the file extension is equal to svg plus xml. If so, we are assigning the value of this variable called new image extension as .svg. I'm assigning the value of this variable called file name as resources /mobile images / and I concat the title that we get, and here I'm using an underscore here, and again concat the value that's stored in the variable called x, and I'm using a unique id function here, and again concat the new image extension. Here I'm creating a new image path to our image that we got from the client side, and then I'm using the move uploaded file function, and I'm obtaining the temporary name of this image file and setting the name of this image to the value that's stored in the variable called file name. And then again using an iud function here, and I'm using an insert query as insert into the product image table, and here I specify the relevant columns as image path column and the product id column, and giving the values as the file name for the image path and the product id for the product id column. And if the file extension was not in the allowed image extension array, then it comes to the else part of this if condition, and it displays a message as invalid image type, and then echo a message as success here if the length of this image file is not less than or equal to 3 and is not greater than 0. Then it comes to the else part of that if condition, and it displays a message as invalid image. Then let's again move to our product.php file, as we have to discuss about this function called change product image. And then let's again move to JS file, and then here's the change product image function, and here I'm obtaining the element with the id called image uploader and storing that in a variable called image here. And after that, on change of this image variable, I'm calling an anonymous function here, and inside that I'm obtaining the length of these image files and storing that in a variable called file count. And inside if condition, I check whether the file count is less than or equal to 3. If so, using a for loop here and using a variable called x and assigning value as 0, and then check whether the value of this x is less than the file count and using an increment here. And after that, I'm obtaining the file with the value x and storing that in a variable called file name, and then I'm creating a new URL as window.url.create object URL, and inside that create object URL function, I'm giving the value as file here and then storing that in a variable called URL. And after that, I'm again obtaining the element with the id I and the value x, and I'm setting the srs as the value that's stored in this URL variable. If the file count was not equal to 3 or was not less than 3, then it comes to the else part of that if condition, and inside that I have used an alert to display a message displaying the file count and telling files you are proceed to upload only 3 or less than 3 files. So we have finished our process of this product registration page. So then let's check whether this is working. Here now we can see our categories listing here, and also the brand and also the model. So let's give the product category as mobile phones, and then the product brand as Samsung here, and then as Galaxy as the model, and then let's give the title as product condition as brand new. And then for the product color, there too we can see our color that's stored in our database is listed here, and I'm using the black color here and giving the product quantity as. So let's check whether our validations are working. Yes, our validations are working. It tells us to enter the cost per item. Yes, we have to enter the cost per item. So let's give some letters to check whether the validation part. Display message as the value you entered is invalid. Let's give the cost as 200 and then giving the product description as uploading the files, image files, and I click on open here, and we can see our selected images are displaying here. That's what we did from the change image function. So then let's click on this save product button, and here it's display message as product saved successfully. So then let's move to our database and let's see whether this product has stored there. We can see product that we inserted has stored in our database, and these are 3 images that we use as the product images of our product. So then let's meet to the next video. So then bye for now.